Happy Monday, happy wonderful week, and welcome to Power Talk. I'm so glad that you have chosen to join me today. I promise you that I've got a good show for you on tap. Hope you enjoy that as well. And I'm just looking forward to learning about creating love in our lives. My guest today is Kizer. He is a spiritual life coach. He is an author. He specializes in relationship building, and he's been supporting people who are in search of love. As an astrologer, he's a rebirther, and he's been a life coach since 1986. So he's got a lot of bandwidth under his belt, so that he should be able to give us some really, really great insight today. And I'm just thrilled and welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Great. You know, I think that's all of us really want is love. I think most people don't understand that with the law of attraction, we got to find it inside first. But, you know, what are some of the tips that you have for our listeners about how to uncomplicate looking for love?
I think it starts with being kind to yourself, really. Because our internal relationship is the template for any other relationship that we have. So anybody who has guilt or self-judgment, we're going to attract that in kind from other people. So that's really the main one. Everything else is sort of a subset of that particular experience.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I don't know if you've ever met anybody that didn't have self-judgment going on at some level in that. I haven't. Certainly I'm working on that for myself all the time. So it really is a process, isn't it?
Continual. And the seeds of it really are in childhood. And I won't necessarily blame mom and dad for that because we have a lot of influences at that time in our life. And part of what goes on is that we get taught that love has to include some kind of disruption or disconnection. That if we call it love, something's going to happen that breaks the connection. And that's the big one. It's regaining the innocence that we once had.
Sure. You know, and I think that also many of us, and this would be me included, really got demonstrated that there was always a condition attached to love. And,
right.
You know, when these patterns get set up before our brain is fully developed and we can't really tell what's real and what's not real, then they tend to be really the hardest ones to get rid of. Sorry about that. Let me turn this off. I was talking to Rachel before the show and forgot and left the phone on. And these things happen. Yeah, so they tend to be, in my opinion, maybe some of the more difficult ones to reach. And I know for me that process has included peeling off the stuff from the higher pieces of it to get down to the real core issues. And that has tended to be one that I have found not only for me but for my clients.
And it's interesting to notice. I mean, part of the work that we do, a lot of times when we deep dive into people's psyche and start sort of rummaging around what negative thoughts are you carrying, that sort of thing. But it's also equally true that we don't have to do that at all. That a simple process known as affirmations can be just as powerful as helping people create new patterns and new habits. One of my favorite thoughts around that is everybody believes, at least consciously believes, the idea that they deserve love. But it takes it to a whole new dimension to add the phrase "for no apparent reason" on the back of that, because that starts to address the thing you discussed a while ago about conditions that we put on having love. And sometimes just that one idea can start a whole ripple of changes going on for somebody to really open up and get what we want.
That's really profound, Ken. I had not thought about that. But that's beautiful. I think I'm going to add that to my list of affirmations. And affirmations are so powerful. You know, the thoughts and the words that circulate in our heads and between us and others are really what sort of carves out the reality that we see in front of us. So,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Related to that, there's the experience we have with people is based on our expectations. And the challenge for people is that unconscious expectations have the same amount of force in our lives as the conscious ones. So that's one of the reasons the affirmations is so great. It's starting to clean that stuff up.
Right.
And the thing is, if we carry guilt, for instance, part of our mind believes that we don't deserve love. They're also telepathic that in their love for us, people will give us what we expect. If we expect that love means things are going to go great for a while and then there's got to be some kind of betrayal, then a lot of times that's the line of least resistance. And that's what we enroll people in acting out around us simply because that expectation is circulating inside of us.
Yeah, and right along the line with that, I heard a teacher not too long ago talk about how, there maybe really isn't room for forgiveness or a need for forgiveness, because if we realize that we actually hired everybody to come play a role in our life, and we chose that, then why would we have to forgive them? They're just doing what we asked them to do, which is, I think, what you're saying.
Well, that's true. But I go back to the Course in Miracles on this one.
Oh, yeah.
Forgiveness is the only thing real in the human world, and that is the correction. That is the path to miracles, is to be able to get to a place of forgiveness, or at least acceptance. Because I find sometimes people just have had experiences that are so difficult to accept that they can't wrap their brain around the idea of forgiveness. Right. But acceptance does the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. It keeps you from storing those wounds inside your body. It lets them pass through.
Right. And it starts to release the burden, the pressure of guilt. I mean, there's such I have a feeling for it. I have difficulty defining the feeling, but it's I guess the weight or the burden of guilt is what acceptance and forgiveness will start to clear.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And it's really interesting how the thoughts and the words that we have and that we say make such a difference on that. A little over a week ago, I woke up with a spasm in my back right at the level of my waist. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. Why would that happen? So I dug out my trusty Louise Hay, and mid-back said it's guilt. And so then I started trying to dredge up, okay, so what would I be feeling guilty about? And several things have come up over the course of a week, but I find it difficult to work on myself. So I've got a trusted colleague in London who does my work, and we trade back and forth. When he needs help, I work on him. When I need help, I turn to him. And we were doing some clearing, and it started off with me emailing him and saying, my back is in spasm today. And then the next day, my back is worse today. And for some reason, we carried on in an email string that always started off with, my back is worse today. And last night, I had an epiphany, and I emailed him and I said, we need to clear that email string, and let's start with a fresh one that says something positive, which is the same, I think, as your affirmation. I had to get that out of my head so that I could release the spasm in my back, and it is much better now. Thank you very much.
Well, just starting with, my back has a spasm or is in spasm, is an affirmation that keeps creating that condition. So, yeah, and that's one of the early things that I heard from the Est people, actually, when they talk about the how precise, how microscopic they got about how we use the words, because they do have that kind of power behind them.
They do. And, it's something that I'm sort of becoming obsessed with right now. I'm getting ready to dive into the book of James in the Bible, because that book, I think, is all about, from a metaphysical spiritual standpoint, which is how I look at that stuff. That's all about using your words, and your word is your wand, as Florence Scovel Shinn said many, many years ago. So it seems to be that that's the next path I'm fixing to head down in my little meditation time, is trying to get a little bit of a deeper handle on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of us really want to be on our joy path, and I think finding love, kind of coming back full circle to our topic for today, finding love is something that can be joyous.
Very much so. And I would say the next step, if we are sort of going through a progression of how to get there, acceptance and the use of affirmations, clearing the guilt, getting to a place of acceptance with ourselves is essential, because trust is the foundation of love. Mm. And guilt is an antidote to trust. So being able to accept who we are starts building that trust that we truly do deserve what we want. The thing about guilt is it can be for things that should seem blindingly obvious that we deserve them, or it's okay to have them. I've worked with people who are guilty for being alive, for being the gender that they were, for wanting to have what they wanted, for having what they want. I mean, so it really is, the trust is how we start to connect with ourselves again. And from that, then it's possible to reach out to other people and create the kind of union that we would like to have.
Absolutely. And, I think another piece of this is I don't know how many of us are actually aware of what we're projecting out in our field because of the thoughts and the beliefs that we carry, and how that affects other people, and how you can magnetically pull somebody to you, and then they hit your field and they go, ooh, wait a minute, this is what I'm feeling. It doesn't feel good. And so they move away, when it may be just one of those old beliefs or a guilt feeling that a person is holding that is projected outwards.
Well, you brought up something I think is really important, because most people understand that conscious and unconscious beliefs have an effect on our experiences, but it's easy. It really is very easy to discern what our unconscious beliefs are if you imagine drawing a 10-foot circle around you and just notice what happens inside that circle. Mm-hmm. That is the projection of our beliefs that happens in our physical world. Now, a lot of times people think, well, bad things have happened, and I certainly consciously would not wish those things to happen. But we're not victims. I mean, that to me is metaphysical principle number one, is that if we're going to change conditions in our world, then we have to take responsibility for somehow participating in those conditions.
Absolutely.
So that awakening process is really vital to get to the point where we can create an inviting experience for other people rather than one that triggers fear.
For sure. When you were talking about that 10-foot circle around you, I recalled an image. I know that you've studied with Leonard Orr and Sandra Ray, and I remember, I don't even remember what year it was that I took the LRT and bought her book, Loving Relationships, and she has a picture in there, and I could see that picture, and it's a couple standing, facing each other, and they're seeing inside each other. They're communicating with what's inside, rather than what's coming from their mouth. And I probably didn't, recall that exactly right, but that's basically the gist I got out of that. And it is so true, and it's so huge, and we tend not to even think about that.
Yeah, and that too actually is, in my mind, is an artifact of childhood, is that intuition, or that telepathy, that connection that we have to people. And that's, okay, here's the example that's coming up. I worked with more than one person actually who has said something to this effect, that they're so clear about their patterns that they can walk into a room of 100 men and find the one that's still an alcoholic, or still hasn't finished their work and it's going to turn out badly. So that's another thing that points to doing your own inner work to get to a
Absolutely.
place where you don't keep recycling those negative experiences.
And that's a huge awareness for that client. And then it's up to the client to take the next step. Okay, what am I going to do about that? Because obviously I'm still running that old program.
Yeah. Well, and I was looking at what I wrote for our talk today and the idea of steps. And what I do with people is most people I think have, 60, 70, 80% of this figured out.
Mm-hmm.
But of course we're all blind to our own shortcomings or our own judgments. And so really what it's about is just going through the list and cleaning up places where we drop the ball, where we don't sustain that ideal self-acceptance or that level of trust. Because the thing is, for anything that's important, whether it's romance or asking for a job, it's a risk.
Mm.
And the more important something is, the more fear it triggers. So somebody who is going for create the love of your life, that's a huge risk, and it's going to trigger a lot of stage fright. So it really requires that certainty about self, that trust in self. Because if you're not willing to be betrayed, you're not going to be successful at creating a successful relationship.
Right.
Because sometimes things don't work out, and you have to be able to weather that storm of loss without giving up your value to yourself. It's not necessarily, okay, let me say it this way. 90% of people's conversations with each other isn't about each other. It's from our past.
Yeah.
We're talking to our past, really.
Oh, yeah.
So when somebody rejects you, they're rejecting 90% of their past.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's not really about self. And that's another way to sustain one's belief in self, one's trust in self.
Don Miguel Ruiz wrote that incredible book called The Four Agreements, which really tells us that. Show up, dress to play, on time, and don't take it personally, and just do your best, And I think if we could remember to do that in any situation, we'd probably be better off. But you're talking about intimacy, really, and that, in my reality, and I think sort of based on years of study of the Course, is intimacy. So right. It means that unless I'm willing to look inside and find the warts and the scabs and heal that stuff, then I'm not going to let anybody else look into me. I'm going to keep them at arm's length or maybe even the football field away.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the Course's ideas, but the idea is that love brings up everything unlike itself for the purpose of healing. So when people start reaching for connection to other people, what they're going to start to find out is what's been in the way of that all along. And it's on that level, people don't have to look for what's incomplete. All we have to do is start reaching for love, and we'll find out what needs to be addressed so that we can continue on the journey of getting connected to another person.
That is so true. And one of the things that I forgot to tell the audience is how they can get in touch with you. Ken, how can somebody get in touch with you and avail themselves of your support in clearing that stuff away?
Let's just use the website centerfораwareness.com.
Okay, that works for me. Yeah, and yes, then you can just contact Kim through that because you really are giving out some really good sentient points here for the people who are listening. So let those who have ears and eyes to see pay attention because it is a stepping off place if you're just starting this journey to look for love, or if you are actually halfway down that road, or maybe you've found someone to be a partner for you in your life to help you heal, because like what Ken said is that it's going to bring up everything that's not healed, not only in you, but also in your partner.
And I would say one of the main points too, that we haven't covered yet, is commitment. Mm-hmm. Because what was astounding to me, the first time I really got this idea, I was reading INC magazine, and a millionaire was talking about what he had gone through. And one of the points he made was he had lost all of his money several times, but he always knew that he could make it back. Mm-hmm. And that idea was new to me. So it really applies here too, which mainly is refusing to give up on the dream and on self. It's really a two-part piece. Mm-hmm. That it doesn't matter. Anybody who's ever succeeded has failed many times, and they refuse to give up on themselves. So, I mean, maybe that's part of the self-acceptance or the trust in self. But it expresses in our commitment.
Absolutely. And that commitment really is a commitment to self, not to anybody else or the dream, in my opinion. It's all about, wanting to be the best you, which is really wanting just to be.
And have fun. I mean, that was my commitment with my wife. Really, that was a primary commitment. That if we realized we were not having fun, that we stop proceedings and get to the bottom of that.
Which is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that really is. Go ahead.
My kind of mantra along that line is that it also should be easy. If it's easy for me, it's right for me. And so that's one of those affirmations that I work with, because it doesn't have to be, I don't think a relationship has to be constant work. It should be fun, like you said.
Well, and complication is another clue of childhood carnage leaking into our daily life, because
I like that word. That's so true, so descriptive.
Because life was complicated when we were children, but love isn't. I mean, the expression of love and the experience, the connection to love, really does start to simplify things. So if we start having to justify why we deserve it or what it takes to get it, then if you can't get to it on your own, certainly reach out to somebody who can help you get a more objective sense of it.
Yeah, because it's just energy, and it's, in my opinion, it's like the highest frequency of energy that we can embody. So why wouldn't we?
Right. Well, if God is love, then love is probably the highest expression of energy that we can manifest in certainly physical form.
For sure that. And, if, as it's written in the Bible, we're created in the image of God. So if God is love, then it extrapolates out that so are we. And, why wouldn't we want to be that and model that energy for everyone we come in contact with?
I'm with you. I just know what I bump into in talking to people about their own theology. And there's a lot of confusion about what God really is.
Oh, yeah.
And so to simplify it down to God is love, and to simplify it even further into love can just be acceptance. Mm-hmm. For instance, that God accepts us as we are. And I mean, maybe one way to handle some of that is to realize that if God really did have a grudge, then we wouldn't still be here. I mean,
exactly.
We've made enough mistakes that he would have found reason to recall us back to heaven or somewhere else.
Or wherever.
If that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I think another thing from childhood that has happened, I think that gets us confused about love, is that many of us have grown up in some sort of religious dogma, church or synagogue or whatever it happens to be, where God, we've prayed to God and we've asked, and we show up on Sunday morning or Saturday or Friday or whatever it is, and we're tuned into that. And then we go home into a dysfunctional family where maybe, the masculine image was not so nice. And then we've had relationships over time that were not so nice. And I think we get all that crossed up, as far as what is love. And I think that's one of the things that we have to sort of peel away, those filters before we can be open to relationship.
Sometimes it's really subtle. To call God the Father, for instance, can instantly trigger somebody's experience of their father, which may be distinctly ungodlike. Mm-hmm. So it really takes some time. And I think, actually, in my opinion, that's probably the most important external relationship that we need to address, and needs to be addressed first, is our relationship to God. Because if we feel that God is vindictive, then there's nothing about life that's safe, and there's nothing, certainly it's going to be difficult to create an intimate relationship with somebody without that fear of God leaking through. So that might be another step in the process of creating an intimate relationship, is just looking at any place in life that creates anxiety. Maybe that's one way to describe the intention of that process.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and just, and so often if we can just sort of find those areas that create anxiety for us and love what that is, take that love and surround whatever that is with it, then many times it will kind of open up and unfold so that we can get down to the nut inside there and go, oh, that was then, this is now, and correct. I can accept it happening and I can let it go.
And maybe it's worth talking about anxiety a little bit as far as what the energy of anxiety is. Like all negative emotions, it's a distortion of something that initially is very important. Anxiety is sort of our radar, expression of looking out for things that might cause problems for us. But anxiety is the assumption that we haven't done our job and bad things are getting ready to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So trying to get rid of anxiety, trying to get rid of anger, those are actually very angry things to do. And once we begin to address the self-judgment, then it turns. It starts to turn. Anxiety begins to become a watchfulness or an awareness or an awakening, for instance. So there are a lot of places where we can go off the track, and it really does take considerable focus to not drop the ball, to tolerate those places where we withdraw acceptance, for instance. And having a good coach or good guide is just essential here. It has to be. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, this has just been huge. I really have enjoyed our conversation today. We've run out of time, but I want to thank you so much. So, Ken, again, tell people how they can get in touch with you.
The website is centerfororawareness.com.
Fantastic.
My name is Ken Kizer.
Fantastic. All right. So, listeners and viewers, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to listen to a few powerful words from the people that I meet along the way. And I look forward to seeing you next week when I will have another amazing guest for you. And until then, remember, people who take responsibility for their lives create the reality they desire. Ciao.